All right, step away from the door for me. Nice ride. Not exactly what I expect to see parked out here. Whose is it?
Mine. It's registered to me. Same name that's on my credentials.
See, thing is, we've had a couple of these stolen lately. And you don't exactly look like the usual owner of a $100,000
That's
SUV.
real?
Or did you pick that up online?
Online?
Yeah, hands behind your back.
Officer Daniels had been on patrol for almost 6 straight hours when he noticed a black SUV parked just off Main Street. The engine was still running. Something about it caught his attention. He walked toward the vehicle with confidence, already convinced it didn't belong in that neighborhood. As he called out to the driver, his thoughts raced through every possible explanation he could think of. Stolen vehicle, financial fraud, someone pretending to be something they weren't. What he didn't know was that the man inside the SUV was completely calm, fully in control, and carried a level of authority that could cause even a seasoned officer to pause and rethink their approach. Before we continue, comment below where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you definitely don't want to miss. Officer Mark Daniels was a patrol officer with 9 years of experience in this district. He had built a reputation for making stops based more on personal suspicion than on clear traffic or legal violations. Over the years, several civilians had filed complaints describing similar interactions. Drivers said they were questioned aggressively despite doing nothing wrong. A pattern was noticeable. Most of those drivers were black. None of the complaints ever led to formal discipline. The black SUV, meanwhile, was parked legally along the curb. There were no visible violations. No laws were being broken. No emergency lights were turned on. Still, Daniels pulled his patrol car in behind the SUV and stepped out. As he did, his body camera activated automatically. Standing next to the driver's door was James Carter, a 41-year-old senior United States Marshal with more than 15 years of federal law enforcement experience. Carter had worked on joint task forces and interstate operations and was no stranger to tense, high-pressure situations. At that moment, he was wearing his official federal uniform, clean, properly marked, complete. His badge was clearly visible, and his credentials were securely carried. Carter stood straight with his hands visible, calm and motionless. He didn't move toward the officer. He didn't try to walk away. Everything about his posture showed discipline, training, and experience. Daniels approached and spoke first. "Is this your vehicle?" he asked. "Yes," Carter replied. Daniels immediately followed up with another question. "Where did you get it?" The question had nothing to do with any stated violation. Carter calmly explained that he was on official business and had stepped out of the vehicle briefly. His voice remained steady, professional, and controlled. That's when Daniels' tone shifted. He stepped closer than necessary, looked Carter up and down, then glanced back at the SUV. Out loud, he questioned how someone like Carter could afford a vehicle like that. The comment was unnecessary, dismissive, and uncalled for. Daniels then demanded identification. Without hesitation, Carter handed over his federal credentials. The badge and ID were current, valid, and clearly legitimate. Daniels studied them longer than required, then shook his head. "This doesn't look real," he said. Daniels contacted dispatch to verify the credentials. The response came back quickly. The identification was valid. Federal status was active. No alerts. No issues. Daniels ignored the confirmation. "So you expect me to believe you're federal?" he asked, raising his voice louder than before. "Yes," Carter replied. Daniels laughed and slowly walked in a circle around the SUV. He suggested that the vehicle might be stolen and hinted that the license plates could be fake. He offered no evidence. He named no specific charge. Carter asked one simple question. "What law am I violating?" Daniels didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer and said, "You're not in charge here." Carter stayed composed. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. His hands remained visible and his stance didn't change. Years of training had taught him how to stay calm when being challenged like this. Daniels then stated that the vehicle could be impounded while further investigation was conducted. He followed that by accusing Carter of impersonating a federal officer, saying it was a serious crime. The accusation was clear and made out loud. Carter corrected him calmly. He stated that the accusation was false and that he was acting legally in his official role. His response was controlled, careful, and precise. People nearby began to slow down and watch. The situation was drawing attention. Daniel seemed aware of the growing audience but made no effort to de-escalate. He reached for his radio. "I need backup," he said. "Possible impersonation." By this point, the situation had escalated entirely based on assumption. The vehicle was legally parked. The federal credentials had been verified. No law had been stated as being broken. Still, The encounter continued as if a crime had already taken place. Carter remained beside his vehicle, calm, steady, and confident. He didn't resist. He didn't try to leave. He waited. What Officer Daniels did not yet understand was that accusing a verified federal officer of faking his identity would not stay a routine patrol issue. Every decision made from this moment forward would be reviewed far beyond the street, and consequences would soon follow. Officer Daniels stood next to his patrol car, his radio still in hand. The request for backup had already gone out. He looked back at James Carter, then at the small group of people beginning to gather nearby. The accusation had been made. Backing down now would mean admitting he was wrong. Carter remained beside his SUV, completely still. His federal uniform was unmistakable, clean, pressed, clearly marked, and worn with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned it. The badge on his chest reflected the afternoon light. His credentials were still in his hand, offered but no longer being accepted. Daniels turned his attention back to Carter. "You're saying you're a U.S. Marshal," Daniels said. "Then explain why you're parked here." Carter answered calmly. He explained that he was on official business and had stepped out briefly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't challenge Daniels' authority. He spoke the way trained federal agents are taught to speak during unnecessary confrontations, measured, deliberate, and precise. Daniels cut him off. "That doesn't answer my question," he said. Daniels again questioned the legitimacy of Carter's uniform. He claimed it could be bought online. He suggested the badge might be fake. He implied that Carter was dressing up to intimidate local officers. The accusation was serious. Claiming someone was impersonating a federal officer carried heavy legal consequences. Daniels made the claim openly, within earshot of the bystanders watching nearby. Carter corrected him once again. "I am a United States Marshal," he said. "My credentials were already verified." Daniels dismissed the statement. He stepped closer, his voice growing louder. "Verification doesn't mean anything if I believe it's fraudulent," he replied. That moment marked a clear shift. This was no longer a routine interaction. Daniels was no longer looking for clarity. He was asserting control. Carter didn't respond right away. He stood still, hands visible, posture straight. His calm demeanor didn't change. Years of federal service had taught him when to speak and when silence carried more weight. Daniels briefly turned away, pacing near his patrol car. He glanced back at Carter's SUV and stated that the vehicle would be impounded pending further investigation. No paperwork had been started. No supervisor had arrived yet. Carter calmly asked again which law justified the impoundment of his vehicle. Daniels ignored the question. A few moments later, the sound of sirens grew louder. A second patrol car pulled up, followed shortly by a third. 2 more officers stepped out. Their arrival immediately changed the atmosphere. Daniels walked toward them and spoke quietly, gesturing back toward Carter. His body language showed confidence, as if the situation was already settled. The responding officers approached Carter together. One of them asked for identification. Carter handed it over again. He showed no frustration. He didn't argue. His uniform, badge, and credentials were all consistent. Everything matched. One of the officers studied the credentials closely, then paused. "You said you're federal?" the officer asked. "Yes," Carter replied. Daniels cut in quickly. "He's claiming to be," Daniels said, "but I don't believe it." The responding officer hesitated. He looked again at Carter's uniform, then back at Daniels. The tension was clear. This was no longer about a parked vehicle. It had become a matter of authority and pride. The officers contacted dispatch themselves. This time the confirmation came back even clearer. James Carter was not only a U.S. Marshal, he was a senior one. The information shifted the tone immediately. One officer took a small step back. Another lowered his voice. Daniels did neither. Instead, he questioned the response. He asked dispatch to repeat the information and suggested there might be an error in the system. Carter stayed silent as the discussion continued around him. He had seen situations like this before, not often, but enough to recognize where it was heading. Daniels turned back toward Carter. "If you really are who you say you are," he said, "then you shouldn't have a problem waiting." Waiting meant detention. Waiting meant escalation. Carter responded calmly. "I'm not required to wait without cause." Daniels accused him of being uncooperative. One of the responding officers stepped in, attempting to calm the situation. He suggested calling a supervisor. Daniels resisted at first, then reluctantly agreed. While they waited, Daniels continued speaking. He questioned how someone like Carter had reached such a position. He suggested favoritism. He implied that federal agencies lowered their standards. The comments were pointed, not subtle. Carter didn't respond. Minutes later, a supervisor was on the way. Dispatch had already flagged the encounter for review. What started as a routine patrol decision was now documented across multiple channels. Daniels stood stiff with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. Carter stood beside his vehicle, uniformed, calm and patient. Both men knew the situation had passed the point of no return. What happened next would decide not only how this encounter ended, but whether Officer Daniels' career would survive it. The supervisor arrived several minutes later. He stepped out of his vehicle calmly, already briefed by dispatch. His eyes moved first to Officer Daniels, then to James Carter standing beside the black SUV. The contrast was immediate. One officer, visibly tense, one federal agent composed, still, and controlled. The supervisor asked a simple question: "What's going on?" Daniels spoke first. He described a suspicious vehicle, questionable identification, and a man he believed was impersonating a federal officer. He emphasized his concerns, presenting the encounter as proactive policing. The supervisor then turned to Carter. Carter identified himself again, clearly and professionally. He stated his rank. He named his agency. He explained why he was parked there and why he had stepped out of the vehicle. His explanation was short and precise. The supervisor asked to see Carter's credentials. Carter handed them over without hesitation. The supervisor examined them carefully. He didn't rush. He checked the badge. He checked the identification. Then he contacted dispatch himself. The response came back immediately. James Carter was a senior United States Marshal. He was on active duty. His credentials were valid. The supervisor handed the credentials back. At that moment, the situation should have ended. It didn't. Daniels challenged the decision. He argued that the vehicle itself was still suspicious. He claimed the license plates needed further verification. He insisted that protocol allowed the SUV to be impounded while the investigation continued. The supervisor asked a simple question: "What violation justifies the impoundment?" Daniels didn't give an answer. The supervisor reminded him that a vehicle cannot be seized without cause. Daniels pushed back, saying officer discretion gave him the authority to act. The exchange grew tense. Carter remained silent as the officers debated. His role was no longer to explain himself. The facts had already been confirmed. Then Daniels made a decisive move. He contacted a towing company. The call was brief. He requested a unit to impound the SUV, gave the location, and stated that the vehicle was part of an active investigation. The supervisor objected immediately. "Cancel that," he said. Daniels hesitated. The supervisor repeated the order. Daniels still didn't comply right away. That pause would later become an important detail. Carter finally spoke. "I am formally instructing you to stop," he said calmly. "This vehicle is federal property being used for official duties." The statement didn't give him authority over local police, but it carried serious legal weight. The supervisor stepped in fully. He ordered Daniels to stand down and told another officer to cancel the tow request. The tow company confirmed the cancellation, but also said a truck was already on the way. Bystanders continued watching. Some were recording. This was no longer a private situation. It was happening in public. Daniels' demeanor shifted. His voice lowered, but his frustration was clear. He accused Carter of trying to intimidate him by using his federal status. The supervisor corrected him. "This situation was escalated unnecessarily," he said. Daniels argued that he was being undermined. The supervisor responded firmly. "You were given verification. You ignored it." Silence followed. Carter remained beside his vehicle. He didn't gloat. He didn't comment. He kept his focus forward. Minutes later, the tow truck arrived anyway. The driver stepped out, confused. He had received conflicting instructions. The supervisor waved him off immediately and explained that the request had been canceled. The tow truck left. That moment marked the collapse of Daniels' justification. The attempt to impound the SUV had failed publicly. The supervisor instructed Daniels to return to his patrol car and told the other officers to clear the scene. Daniels did not apologize. Carter was told he was free to go. Before leaving, Carter asked one final question. His tone wasn't confrontational or emotional. "Will this be documented?" The supervisor answered honestly, "Yes." Carter nodded. He returned to his vehicle and got inside calmly. He didn't look back. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, the scene came to an end, but the incident did not. Within hours, the encounter was logged internally. Within days, it reached command staff. Within weeks, it moved into legal review. What Officer Daniels believed was a routine stop had turned into a serious professional liability. And what James Carter experienced was about to go far beyond that street. The incident didn't end when Carter drove away. Within 24 hours, A formal report was filed not by Officer Daniels, but by his supervisor. The report documented the initial stop, the verification of federal credentials, the repeated dismissal of confirmation, and the attempted impoundment of a legally parked vehicle. An internal review was triggered immediately. Department records later showed that Officer Daniels was placed on administrative duty pending investigation. His body camera footage, radio communications, and written statements were all secured. What had been described at the scene as officer discretion was now being examined as possible misconduct. James Carter did not contact the media. He did not issue a statement. He allowed the process to move forward quietly. That silence didn't stop the story from spreading. Witness accounts began circulating online. The public nature of the encounter, a uniformed federal officer being accused of impersonation while standing beside his own vehicle, drew attention quickly. Civil rights attorneys took notice. Federal oversight channels were notified. A separate inquiry was opened to determine whether Daniels' actions met the standard for racial profiling. Reviewers focused on key moments: the absence of an initial violation, the verified credentials being dismissed, the escalation without cause, and the attempt to seize the vehicle despite a supervisor's objection. Each decision was logged. Each deviation from protocol was noted. Officer Daniels was interviewed multiple times. According to internal summaries, he maintained that he acted on instinct. He said the uniform raised suspicion. He argued that authority should always be questioned. Those explanations did not align with department policy. Meanwhile, James Carter returned to duty. Federal colleagues later confirmed that he continued his assignments without interruption. The incident didn't define his career, but it reinforced something he already understood. That uniform did not protect him from being questioned. What followed was unavoidable. Weeks later, the department concluded its review. Disciplinary action was recommended. Training failures were cited. Supervisory oversight was addressed. The attempted impoundment of the vehicle was officially ruled unjustified. The findings were sealed internally, but the consequences were not. Civil litigation followed. The lawsuit cited wrongful detention, false accusation, and racial bias. It detailed the public nature of the incident and the reputational damage caused by the impersonation claim. The department declined to comment publicly. Officer Daniels was reassigned. No apology was issued. For many observers, the story wasn't about one officer or one stop. It was about how easily authority can be misused, and how slowly it is corrected when bias enters the situation. A legally parked car, a verified federal officer, a routine patrol that turned into a national conversation. James Carter never raised his voice. He never resisted. He never lost control. And yet, it still happened. If you believe accountability matters, if you believe no one should be treated as guilty because of how they look, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, then make sure you're subscribed, because these are the stories we will keep telling.